It's 1918, the world in his middle of the catastrophe. For the last 4 years, European has ground zoned for war. The Allies on the sides and certain powers on the others. Tens of the millions of the people have already lost their lives. However, that's nothing compared to the worst was coming. The world was about to face one of the deadliest disasters in history. No one really knows where exactly it started. Some say in the began in the Kansas, other point fingers at China, but during the war, no one really cared because a more serious crisis into the front of them. And the flu was just one of the consequences of the war as people imagined at that time. However, when it reached Spain, the Spanish media did not stay silent since Spain was neutral during the war, and that's when the world started paying attention. Even then, it wasn't the top priority since allies were about to win the war, and they wouldn't let some kind of the flu to waste all their efforts that they have been putting for the last 4 years. They were ready to do everything to end the war finally. It is estimated that 500 million people were infected. It might not be much, but today's standards, because the population has soared in the recent decades, but back then it was one third of the world populations, and the death toll reached up to 100 million people. So to some estimate, or 6 to 8% of the global populations. That is even higher than the greatest conflict in the humanity history caused World War II. Crises are, of course, bad, regardless if it's a virus that separates around the world, or mainly conflict, or even the economic crash. However, despite all of that, every crisis presents opportunities. It might seem disgusting to cash out on the misery of others, but that's how humanity has been progressive in the entire of his existence. And the crisis we are experiencing now is no different. Of course, it's unfair to compare the consequences of each crisis. However, they all follow similar trends and patterns. Crises by their nature seem bad. I mean, who wants to slowing economy and high unemployment, especially when you are so dependent on that monthly paycheck? However, a crisis is nothing but merely a transfer of the wealth from one group to another. To some, it's actually disasters that would make them poor. To others, it's the opportunity to make a few more millions. Looking through the markets now, it seems like everything is down. The S&P 500 has been down by the 1,000 points. Still, it had recovered a little bit, at least at the time of the writing the script, because before you get into the watch the video, it must be recovered. Edited, sent on the animations, animated, and then finally uploaded to the channel. However, if YouTube is going to decide that you aren't going to be interested in this video, you might not get even the notifications. So give this video the thumbs to let YouTube know that you are interested. Anyway, it's difficult to predict the future, maybe almost impossible, but what we can assume otherwise is that humanity went through many crises, and one way or another we have figured out the solutions and somehow solved the problem. And while we are discussing the crisis, people on the other side of earning millions, if not billions, out of it. No matter how this crisis is going to last, sooner or later the vaccine will be created and the world will get back to normal. Borders will be open again. Offices will get back to work, restaurants, cafes, and malls will welcome everyone as they were before the crisis, which means the panic is going to vanish. which means that S&P 500 will rise again at least get back to where it was. Smartest investors understand that perfectly, so although the market is still plummeted, they are slowly but significantly invested. From December 2007 to the summer of 2008, the S&P went down by the 50%. That is the significant drop because the real estate market collapses and dragged down with its entire economy. Millions of the people lost their jobs, businesses were closing down one by one, and even some of the largest corporations decided bankruptcy. It seems like the World War never recovered from such as a catastrophe. However, few years down the road, the economy didn't just recover, but the S&P 500 hit the record and hit 3,400 points before the panic of the current virus, and whoever understood the nature of the such crises emerged victorious after it. Of course, those who made the wrong bet lost. Of course, those who are wrong bet lost lots of the money. That's why it's important to understand how the crisis is impacting the world, which industries is the boosting and which ones is destroying. And even these industries are the suffering, which companies would survive the storm and which ones wouldn't. In March, the US has banned the entirely of the foreign nations who have traveled to China. Iran, Austria, Belgium, and many other nations 14 days before their arrival. US citizens or permanent residents who have visited the high-risk area and to fly into the of the 13th international airports with exchange entry screen capabilities. On March 18, presidents of the United States announced that the U.S. would close its northern border with Canada on the March 20. The U.S. and Mexico agreed to restrict non-essential travel over their shared border for the 30 days. That was the big hit for the aviation industry. In fact, before the multiple other countries, especially European countries, completely closed their borders, like France and Bulgaria, with so many restrictions, revenues began to fall down significantly as everyone was asking for the refund and began canceling their flights. But that isn't not the fault of these airlines. Many of them are still strong companies with the huge fleet of the planes that cause a panic in the market, which damage the industry even further. Take an example. If of the American Airlines, the stock price which went from the over $30 to just to 10, that looks like the company is about to go broke, which might really happen, but they aren't alone. Every one airline got the hit. The stock price might even go further. But in fact, we will live in a such globalization world that flying is not going to stop. Our economies are interconnected. Watch the dice will keep rolling. So once the flight restrictions will be unable, airlines will restore their shadows as usual, and the stock price will get back where it was, which means now the best time to invest. The challenge is to invest in the right airlines. I mean, you have to be confident that it has enough resources to survive the crisis. That's why things like balance sheets and income states exist, especially if the publicly traded company. The problem with crises is that they are causing uncertainty, and that is bad for businesses. It scares off the investors and push them to sell their investments. Investors are afraid to lose their fortunes, so they are massively selling their shares and cash out before it gets worse, or they simply want to sell the shares that would go down anyway and invest in the companies that would rise in the middle of this crisis. But regardless, is that going to reduce the demand of the certain companies, which would lead their stocks prices to plumbed anyways. Let's take another example how else the virus is impacting society. Entire nations are declaring quarantine and advising their citizens not to leave their homes, including the United States, which led to the fewer people to move around. So companies like the Uber and Lyft, whose businesses model depends on the moving people, have suffered dramatically. In under a month, the stock's price went from the over 40 to under 15, but it's slightly recovering. And Uber was already doing pretty bad before the virus, so it's suffered enormously. Even if you take the most valuable company in the world, Apple, the stock's price is falling like a rocket. It's down by $100 to $229. On one side, their supply side has stopped. Due to the virus, the factories are shut down in China, and on the other, the panic is causing certainly, so people would rather save that spends their last $1,000 on top of that. Apple closed all of these stores, but despite the crisis, Apple hasn't lost its brand name, nor its manufacturer sites or stores. Once everything is back, the stock's price would get back to where it is. But the question is when. Probably when the vaccine is ready. Vaccines aren't easy to develop. They take years of the research and work, not hundreds of the millions of the dollars, if not billions, just to develop the vaccine against one disease. However, without a vaccine, is the matter of the time before everyone will get infected. Entire nations are on the line to get the vaccine so that they can get back to businesses. Dozens of the companies are public labs around the world are working on it to prevent the spread of the virus. The most notable of them are BioNTech, CureVac, and Moderna. This is the stock surprise biotech in the literary struggle once the panic took over the world. Just take a look at his past. So whatever is going to create the vaccine first will profit enormously. As we have mentioned before, that the crisis crisis for some, but opportunity for others. It's slowing down economies, taking companies out of the businesses, rising unemployment rate, but at the same time making others enormously rich. It doesn't matter what the nature of the crisis is, they are one way or another impacting the economy, whether it's the real estate, a dot-com bubble, a Bitcoin bubble, or a virus.